Hello and welcome to today's Leaving Cert history lesson, which is going to be the case study of the Jarrow March. First of all, what is the Jarrow March, or what was the Jarrow March? Well, the Jarrow March is basically when a group of men from the town of Jarrow marched from the town of Jarrow in the northeast of England down to London in protest against the closing down of their vital shipping industry. Okay, the closing down of these industries basically meant that there was zero work in the town of Jarrow, and the British government did nothing to help them. Okay, so as a result, a lot of men, unemployed men, marched from Jarrow to London kind of as a form of protest and as a form of maybe getting support. And they also had a petition as well, and they got lots of signatures on their petition. And the idea of this petition was that if they got enough signatures, hopefully the British government would do something to help the people in the town of Jarrow. Okay, so this, guys, happened during the interwar period. So this between the period of World War I and World War II, okay? And between World War I and World War II, there was a global economic recession. There was a Great Depression, okay? And Britain was hit hard by this. Why was Britain hit particularly hard? Well, Britain had just fought in World War I, and they had spent huge sums of money in that war, and they're also spending huge sums of money keeping their empire going, okay? So as a result, their economy has taken a bad hit, okay? Particular the old style industries that Britain had, okay? So these industries go back to the Industrial Revolution in the 1800s. For example, shipbuilding, steelworks and coal were particularly affected badly by this Great Depression, okay? So as communities had built up around these trades during the Industrial Revolution, okay? So like, you know, you can imagine if there's a shipbuilding yard built in Britain during the Industrial Revolution, a big town is going to build up, and that town completely relies on that shipbuilding yard, okay? So, you know, most of the men in that yard will be employed, in that town will be employed in a shipbuilding yard, and then every other business in that community will be a knockoff from shipbuilding, okay? So when these old heavy industries started to decline and eventually go out of business, okay, entire towns were affected. All people living in an area around a shipbuilding either directly or indirectly relied on that dominant industry in the town, okay? And if you want to look at a picture on the right hand side, guys, that's a Palmer shipbuilding yard from the town of Jarrow, and that was one of the yards that was closed, okay? So first of all, guys, let's have a look at where Jarrow is. So if we look at a map of England, Jarrow is in the northeast of England. Okay, it's based on the River Tyne. And why is it in the northeast of England on a river? Well, obviously, if they're building ships, it's handy that, you know, their ships can easily get out to sea or get out onto that river. Okay, now it was described by a British playwright, J.B. Priestley, as an idle and ruined town. There is no escape anywhere in Jarrow from its prevailing misery, for it is an entirely working class town. And while that's a grim description, that was what Jarrow was. It was a working class town where everybody either worked directly in shipbuilding or indirectly were employed from shipbuilding, okay? And it had once been, so guys, in the, you know, go back to the 1800s, it was a huge center for shipbuilding, okay? For example, the yard we looked at here in this previous slide, this is Palmer's yard, and this was one of the most modern and innovative shipbuilding yards in the world, and this yard was located in Jarrow. Okay, so you can imagine the amount of people that a yard like that employed. Okay, in the early 1900s, more than 1/4 of the world's shipping tonnage was built in the northeast of England. Okay, so like 1/4 of the world's shipping was built here in the northeast, an absolutely colossal amount of shipping. So, you know, naturally enough, you can imagine there's a huge amount of people in the northeast who are employed in shipbuilding, and a huge amount of people who rely on shipbuilding. Okay. The shipbuilding boom of the early 1900s was temporary. Okay, why was there a great need for ships in the 1900s? Well, a lot of it has to do with the First World War. So in the early 1900s, because of the First World War, Jarrow built a lot of ships that were used by the military, by the Navy, and by other groups. Okay, but by 1930, this had slowed down. Okay, why? Number one, because there's a global economic recession, and number two, there was no sign of any war coming at the moment, so there was no real need for all, you know, mass production of ships. Okay, By 1930, the National Shipbuilding Securities Body recommended rationalization of the shipbuilding industry in Jarrow. Rationalization means, guys, they carried out a review and they decided it was not rational for Jarrow to have so much shipbuilding because they're not producing enough. The demand for them for their ships is no longer needed. So what did they do? They started to slowly close down the shipbuilding industry in Jarrow. Okay, and by 1935, Jarrow shipbuilding was shut down and the huge cranes at Palmer's were dismantled. So here again, guys, the bottom right hand side of our slide, there are the cranes at Palmer's. That's how they used to launch ships. They used to put them on ramps and guide the new ships down into the sea or into the River Tyne, wherever it may be. But this had all come to an end by 1935, okay? And the real shock about this is people, usually when you're fired, or not fired, you're made redundant, okay? So you're made redundant from your job, you get compensation, and you get notice, hopefully, as well. You might be told in 6 months' time you're going to be made redundant, you're going to lose your job, but you're going to get compensation, okay? You're going to get paid. This did not happen in Jarrow, okay? And as a result, a lot of people lost their jobs with very little notice and no compensation. And some people who worked in the company also had bought shares in the company, okay? And they might have bought a £100 share. And this, they completely lost that share as a result because the industry just went. The shipbuilding industry had just disappeared, okay? What happened because of this? Well, because of the shipbuilding in Jarrow closed down, unemployment soared. And unemployment in the town of Jarrow reached at least 70%. Okay. However, a local Labour politician named Ellen Wilkinson estimated that it was more around the 80% mark. Okay, that just shows you how many people relied on shipbuilding in Jarrow. So unemployment basically means the amount of people who are fit and able to work and can't get a job. Okay, that's where that percentage comes from. So 80% of the people in Jarrow who are fit and able to work can't find a job now because shipbuilding has closed down. Okay, so it gives you an idea of how reliant a place like Jarrow was on shipbuilding. Now, what did the government do to help? Well, the government did do a small bit to help at the very beginning in Jarrow, but it wasn't really enough. Okay, so social welfare payments were issued on a basis of a means test. Okay, this often caused the breakup of families as the pensions of aged parents would be included in an assessment of a family's means. Okay, so basically, guys, they would do a means test, and this was basically decide how much money that family needed. Okay, and what often meant was certain members of the family had to move out because you could have a family of 8 or 9 people, and they wouldn't give you enough money to support all those people, so you'd have to move out. Okay, so this caused the split up of families. Okay, you could go on the dole, you could claim social welfare, and if you were on the dole, you had to sign on twice a week. Now, if you remained on the dole for more than a few months, you were put into something called poor law. Okay, and what the poor law was basically it was a scheme of public works similar to what was brought into Ireland during the famine, and this meant that if you're on a dole for too long of a time, you're basically made to work on things like building roads and this kind of thing, and working in quarries and that kind of thing. And the thing about that is you got very, very little money for it. Okay, and another thing as well is if you're unemployed and you're actively trying to find a job, but then the government say, hang on a sec, you've been unemployed for 2 months, you need to start doing work and labour and the public works. How are you meant to find a job if you're being asked to work, hard manual labour by building roads every day of the week? Okay, so public works were not a good long-term solution. And a few different kind of groups kind of emerged and stood up against the government. Okay, and there was one particular group who were very, very controversial, and they were called the National Unemployed Workers Movement, okay? And these were a communist group. So if you look at the picture on the left of the slide, guys, you can see the communist sickle and hammer, okay? And that was the communist symbol. And everyone in Britain, everyone in a democratic country was really wary and afraid of communism, okay? So as a result, the Jarrow marchers distanced themselves from the National Unemployed Workers Movement. They did not want anything to do with them, guys, okay? Why? Because they are communist, okay? The Jarrow marchers said, we want to distinguish ourselves from those communists. We want to go march by ourselves and get support by ourselves, okay? Because the people in Britain are never going to support a communist group. So, as a result, we know what did they do? The Jarrow Marchers organised a march, okay? And Jarrow was a very Catholic town, okay? And this was unusual for the UK because most people in the UK are Protestants, okay? So similar to Ireland, Jarrow was a Catholic town. So the marchers, the guys who took part in the Jarrow March, they called themselves the Jarrow Crusaders or the Jarrow Crusade. And this was kind of because it was like a reference to the Bible. It was a biblical reference, okay? So the Jarrow Marchers, their march began on October the 5th, 1936, okay? And if you remember, guys, I mentioned earlier the Labour MP, Ellen Wilkinson, who reckoned that unemployment was at about 80%. Well, that's her there in the picture, okay? And she was a member of the Labour Party. And the Labour Party, guys, kind of are a political party who stand for the rights of working class people and working class workers. In particular, groups like the Jarrow Marchers, who are working class people who have been left unemployed, okay? And she was a big supporter of the Jarrow Marchers, and she was a well-known politician, so she marched with the Jarrow Marchers for quite a lot of the way to raise publicity, okay? 200 fit men took part in the Jarrow March. Remember, guys, these guys are marching for days on end, okay? So, you know, you had to be fit and probably reasonably young. So 200 young fit men who passed a medical examination from the town of Jarrow were allowed to take part in the march, okay? Before they marched, I think there was £1,000 raised to fund expenses. So these are things like food, medical care. I think they actually bought an old bus and they filled up the bus with food, medical supplies, tents, all things that they would need on their march, okay? And their marching began at 9 a.m. every day, and they marched in army style, guys, okay? So they marched in military style, which meant they would march for 50 minutes and then stop for 10 minutes of a rest. And this continued every day for 10 or 12 hours, okay? And they marched through many towns and villages along the way. And they were doing this because it would get support from the locals in those towns and villages, okay? Remember, guys, Jarrow wasn't the only town that was affected by the economic recession and the Great Depression. There were a lot of other towns where unemployment levels are quite high. So the Jarrow Marchers planned on their route, we're going to march through all these small towns and villages and get support along the way, okay? And with them, guys, we know that the Jarrow Marchers had a petition, okay, and this petition was to be delivered to the government, and basically was to demand that the government help out the Jarrow Marchers, help out the town of Jarrow, and invest money there, provide some means of employment for people, okay. The petition that they were delivering to Parliament had 11,000 signatures from Jarrow, and they collected a further 90,000 signatures along the way. So they had over 100,000 signatures by the time the marchers reached London, okay? And again, as you know, this petition demanded a new industry to be established in Jarrow. So the people in Jarrow were saying to the government, lads, we need a new industry here. We cannot have 80% unemployment in our town. Please invest money and set up some kind of new industry or something here, okay? So after 25 days of marching, so yeah, it took them 25 days to march from Jarrow to London. A public demonstration was held in Hyde Park. Okay, so guys, look at the picture to the right hand side there. That's Hyde Park in London, and the Jarrow marchers basically got up on stage and kind of said why they were marching, why they were there. Okay, and look at the crowd that's turned out, and it gives you an idea, guys, of the publicity the Jarrow march generated. Okay, now the Jarrow marchers did not go to Parliament in London. They went to Hyde Park, but they did not go to Parliament. Basically, they were afraid that a riot might break out, okay? They are afraid if we go to Parliament, there could be riot police or something, and a riot could break out, and we want this to remain peaceful, okay? And their Labour MP friend, so Ellen Wilkinson, she presented the petition with 100,000 signatures to the Parliament in London. Okay, now the British Prime Minister didn't really care. He didn't really give them any assurances or make any promises to the Jarrow marchers. He didn't want to turn around and say, yeah, fair enough, I'm going to invest money in Jarrow and make it an economically vibrant place again, okay? He did not do that, all right? And he also refused to meet a small group of the marchers as well, okay? And what this kind of did is it kind of generated even more support for the Jarrow marchers. All right, so by the Prime Minister not really making the Jarrow marchers any promises and not even meeting the Jarrow marchers, it kind of generated a bit of anger and distrust towards the government and a bit more support for the Jarrow marchers, okay? So what was the aftermath and what was the result of the Jarrow Crusade or the Jarrow marches, okay? Well, as we know, the government didn't pledge to do anything immediate, so there was no immediate impact, okay? However, there were some longer term impacts, but again, some of these long-term impacts cannot really be attributed to government help. Okay, so for example, first long-term impact, a shipbreaking yard and engineering works were established in the town of Jarrow in 1938, and steelworks were set up in 1939. But guys, what was on the horizon in 1938 and 1939? World War II. So Britain was going to increase its military output and military engineering works anyway. Okay, and I suppose, that might not have been as a result of government help. That might have just happened anyway because there was a demand for new ships and new engineering technologies to fight in World War II. The Northeast in general began to prosper again as Europe, as he said, has geared up for World War II, but can be, as we've already mentioned, can this be ascribed to the march? Like, was this as a result, were the government pressured into investing into the Northeast because of the march, or would they have done it anyway because of World War II? All right. Now, after World War II, during World War II and I suppose leading up to World War II, Jarrow became vibrant again because of World War II, because of the demand for ships, steelworks and engineering to contribute to the war effort, okay? Now, the economy declined again after World War II. So, again, why? Because Britain has just fought in a world war for 6 years, okay, and spent huge vast of money. So there was another recession in Jarrow, but it was not as bad as the one experienced in 1935 and 1936, okay? So overall, guys, the march was... It generated great publicity, it generated a lot of interest, but because of the British government kind of they didn't really care about it, not a whole lot happened until World War II came around. And World War II meant that Jarrow became a vibrant, economically productive place again. But again, was this because of the British government or was it because of necessity, because of World War II? Probably more to do with necessity, okay? Guys, thank you very much for watching. Keep an eye on the page for more videos.